Tiptoe around with face of a stranger. Quiet observer, never get too close. I see the world, but it's through this window. Another side to see, I'm ready to know. Not every story's written on a sleeve. Some stories take digging deep. Eyes wide open, words unspoken. Where are you going, darling? Where have you been? Stories to tell, emotions we felt, good and the bad in the hands we've been dealt. I wanna know why, I wanna know why you're the way you are. He's from the city, she's from the south. Two different chapters told miles out. They're back row living in his White House. So many stories that I need to know. Not every story's written on a sleeve. Some stories take digging deep. Eyes wide open, words unspoken. Where are you going, darling? Where have you been? Stories to tell, emotions we felt, good and the bad in the hands we've been dealt. I wanna know why you're the way you are. So many stories right in front of me. Some people climb to heights I've never seen. Too many falling down off their feet. These stories take digging deep. Eyes wide open, words unspoken. Where are you going, darling? Where have you been? Stories to tell, emotions we felt, good and the bad in the hands we've been dealt. I wanna know why you're the way you are. Why you're the way you are. Why you're the way you are. Tiptoe around with face of a stranger. Quiet observer, never get too close. I see the world, but it's through this window. Another side to see, I'm ready to know. Not every story's written on a sleeve. Some stories take digging deep. Eyes wide open, words unspoken. Where are you going, darling? Where have you been? Stories to tell, emotions we felt, good and the bad in the hands we've been dealt. I wanna know why you're the way you are. He's from the city, she's from the south. Two different chapters told miles out. They're back row living in his White House.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Silverline Wednesday Night Wham! Hosted by Scott Wakefield.
Hello, everyone. I'm Scott Wakefield. Thank you, Tim, for that great intro. It is Silverline's Wednesday Wham, and I am here with a panel of experts. Tonight's topic is color and coloring. Full disclosure, this is a topic I know about that much about. I do a lot of words, so we're going to rely on the artists tonight, and I'm going to keep my yap shut for the most part. And let's just get started. We will go through our lineup here. I'll start so you can forget about me. My name's Scott Wakefield, as I said. I am the co-creator and co-writer of Steam Patriots. That is a title coming out soon from Silverline. I'm also helping with publicity for Silverline, and I am the host, your humble host, for our Wednesday night shows. Next, I've got Jeremy Kahn. Go ahead.
Hey, Jeremy. Yeah, hello, everyone. I'm Jeremy. I'm doing the coloring work for Bloodline, which is currently being kickstarted at this very moment. Also, I am Future Comic. I'm be coloring Cray, which is basically a colorized version of a Gauntlet comic title that was put out in the 80s or 90s. Forgot now.
90s.
Anyway, back then.
Wow.
Okay, and first coloring lesson. This is yellow.
That's good. All right. Thank you. In my lineup, I've got Dan next. Go ahead, Dan.
Hey, I'm Dan Hosek. I'm working with Scott as the colorist and letterer for Steam Patriots. I worked at Marvel Comics in the mid-'90s as an assistant editor. I kind of did a self-published comic called File 13 around 2015 to 2017-ish. I'd like to get back into it. It was just one of those things where it was more of an expensive hobby than a gig that kind of came close to breaking even. So I had to put it on the back burner. But I'd like to get back into it now that I'm kind of getting a lot more into the comic fold again.
Thank you, Dan. Tim, you're next.
I am Tim TK. I am the associate editor at Silverline, which means I handle the online scheduling and just kind of whatever gets thrown my way. One such project being the production of the Wednesday night show. I'm the live producer, so I'll be talking to you all in chat. I am also currently writing another title, which is in marketing limbo.
All right. Excellent. And Elena Morton, you're next.
Hi, I'm Elena Morton. I'm a comic artist, current Cuber student, and comic colorist for a book at Silverline that's coming out pretty soon, White Devil.
All right. Excellent. Alex.
Hello, my name is Alex Gallimore. I'm the current penciler for Cat and Mouse, which you'll be seeing a page from tonight, as well as future projects to come at Silverline.
All right. And finally, last but not least, Mr. C. Michael Lanning.
Hey, I'm C. Michael Lanning. I'm a pencilist here at Silverline, currently working on a future project called The Rejects.
All right, and we will, as we go along, later on, we'll tell you all how to find us and find our work. And we've got some other projects that aren't necessarily on Silverline, but we'd love to. We can make shameless promotional plugs for ourselves. And in tonight's episode, we will discuss all things color and coloring. We're going to discuss how coloring is done. We're going to discuss really what a color is. It colorer or colorist? Colorist. What a colorist does and what goes into the thought process behind that, and then the actual process. And then we're going to also talk about the history and the evolution of colors in comic books and the nuts and bolts of it. We've got I don't know how it used to be done and what changed and how things have revolutionized the industry, made things easier, made things more visually appealing. And then hopefully if we have time, we're going to then get into the the psychology of colors, what colors do for visual arts. And we can talk a little about movies and so forth, what the color tones and the feeling that colors can impart for us as viewers and readers, consumers of that art form. But before we do that, I'm going to point you all to Kickstarter. We are currently running a Kickstarter campaign for 2 titles. And Silverline has been doing 2 titles at a time. We've been calling them double features. It's been working out really well. It's a great idea by Roland to feature 2 titles together, and those have been going every other month. Biggest thing we have, what Silverline does is all of our work is finished. So if you're hesitant about backing a project, any crowdfunding project, you're afraid that you might not actually get that project. Fear not. Silverline's projects are done, and what you're really doing is pre-ordering a comic book. So when the campaign is over, they click print at Kablam, and within a few weeks of the campaign closure, you will get your comic books. And we are a small independent press, and what is really awesome is you become part of the Silverline family. We have our projects on Kickstarter, and we have a lot of cool bonuses down the line. Any crowdfunding campaign, you can always get the product, but then there's always more, and there's tons of original art. And I believe all of the original pencils, the pages are available in the Kickstarter campaign, well, except for the ones that are spoken for. So there's 9 days left in the campaign. Jump on over there and please support those comic books and the artists who created them. We've got 2 stories, Friar Rush and Bloodline. Bloodline is a one-shot, real gritty action adventure story with a tough guy protagonist and a lot of guns and butt kicking. So if you like an action story, that one's for you. And Friar Rush is a story about a Middle Ages defrocked man of the cloth who has made it to modern day New Orleans, and he is running amok in a nefarious way. And that story will continue in, I believe, 4 parts at least. That's the Friar Rush story. So it's kind of both of them have a supernatural element to them, and both of them are a little gritty, a little PG-13 with the blood and guts, and they're pretty cool. So take a look at those. We'd love for you to support them. Have I missed anything?
Sounds good to me.
All right. So let's get rolling. I'm going to ask, so we've got Alex or C. Michael, whoever speaks up first. Before coloring happens, so before any of that happens, the writer and the artist, generally the penciler, they have a meeting of minds and they say, the writer says, I want the story to do, I want the panels to do this and say this. And through back and forth, the writer and the artist come up with what they want the page to look like. And they will draw some thumbnail sketches, real basic sketches. If you've seen anything like storyboarding for a movie, those sketches can be real raw or sometimes pretty detailed. And then when they decide on what they like, they do something like what Alex is doing. And Alex, I don't know if you can expand on what I just said. Or see, Michael.
What were you alluding to?
Once the thumbnail sketches are done, you get out you have a piece of paper.
I do.
Some people do people pencil digitally? Is there digital penciling?
For issue 2 of Cat and Mouse, most of it was penciled digitally on my end. But for issue 3, I've gone all traditional. So yeah, after you do your thumbnails,
thank you.
Then generally you just go from that to roughs. This is sort of like a rough, but since my printer is not working, I've been just using the thumbnails and just going straight onto the boards, and it's been working. And then from this point of view, like say this is like a finished panel, this one's a finished panel, then an inker would take that and define the lines and make it easier for a colorist to add in color and bring it full circle.
So then, yeah, so pencils, then inks, and then yes, a colorist would take that art. And last week we talked about one of our titles was colored by hand. Does anyone remember which title is still colored by hand?
Divinity.
Divinity, yes, Divinity was colored by hand. Okay, but that's, from what I understand, pretty rare.
Yes, in today's age.
Okay, so the colorist would get the inked files, and then somebody take over. What happens next, Dan?
After you get the inked files, you just kind of set it up, make sure if I'm doing a page, I make sure it's to whatever specs the printer requires the page to be, to make sure. I've worked with other artists in the past where things were all kind of wonky sized, so you kind of had to like resize a page or move some panels around to get everything. Hopefully, if someone knows what they're doing and they're super professional, then you don't have to do any of that. But sometimes, as a colorist, especially for indie books, you're kind of also a production guy. And then I think if you ask 10 different colorists, you're going to get 10 different answers of what their process is. I remember back when I was at Marvel real early on, they used to color specifically in channels because they didn't want to touch the black channel. They wanted that just to be the line art. And so your coloring, you wouldn't really mix any, you have your cyan, yellow, and magenta and black, which is K, in the printing process. And they didn't want you to touch the K channel. So all your coloring had to be in the other ones. But now that I think that's changed, but sometimes you can end up getting colors that are pretty dark if you add too much in the K channel. So, but when I set up I'll take the inked art and I'll make that its own layer, and I'll turn it into a multiply layer, and then underneath that, multiply layer in Photoshop just means that it's transparent. So anything that's white, anything under it will show through. That's all that means. And then I would flat colors in underneath on a layer below the line art, and then I would add a layer probably on top of that of shadowing, another layer for highlighting, and then special effects. I work with a lot of layers generally. If I screw something up, I don't screw it all up. So that's pretty much how I operate. But again, if you ask another colorist, they might have a completely different method that they use when they're coloring. So I'm going to ask around and see.
Elena, is that how you color, or?
It's pretty similar. I have, there's a very specific way we've been taught at Qbert where it's like everything kind of has to follow, but also different programs. I just color in Photoshop, so it's very, very similar to what Dan was saying. But instead of multiply here, one second, let me quickly, I'm actually coloring a page right now. So if I just kind of look over at my things, one of my windows is down. Instead of multiply, I go through and I separate the line art from the white by first I convert it to a grayscale file. And then from there, I delete all the color layers on that. So with the CMYK, I delete all those. So it's just black line. And then I bring that over. So it's just aligned with just the black, not the white. And then I have a layer underneath that that's called flats, but I don't do multiply really. But it's very similar, basically the same besides that little white. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
Does anybody do anything different? Anybody have a method or a trick that they learned or they follow?
Yep, I follow something similar to the Hi-Fi Colors guide, basically, where I actually have a script in Photoshop that's based off their script, where what it does is similar to what she was doing, where you separate it to the grayscale. After that, though, basically two different ways. If I'm working off a file I scanned in the original artwork, I actually use work with it in CYMK. That's I can adjust the color levels and get as much as the because when coloring you don't always get pure black because you get some blues and such. So you want to get some of that as far gone as you can. So I adjust the levels, saturation, brightness, and so forth, or use the curve tool. And I try to get as much of the color gone as I can while keeping the original line work intact. Then I convert to grayscale, where then I try to make it 100% black or close to as possible. I then select that page I just fixed up, create a new layers channel, in the layers channel, in the channel layer, I go ahead and create a new one. From there, what I do, I'm trying to do something. Doing it. Yes, channel, create a new layer. You then copy and paste the image you just fixed up to that new layer in the channels. Basically, you're creating something called an alpha channel. And that's basically your black plate. Once that's set up, there's like a little option tool on the bottom left of the channel area. It's like a dotted circle. It says load channel as selection. What load channel as selection does is it selects everything but the black. So then you go ahead, go to the main channels, which is the CYMK, to no longer on the black one. Then you invert the selection. Now the selection is only selecting the black line art. Everything that's not black is not selected. Then what you do is you just go ahead and use the fill tool on the new layer, and you basically now created a layer specifically just for the line art. And then you can color underneath there without having to worry about affecting the line art at all. And if you want to do color holes, you can just use the lock transparency option to basically color over the line art and basically do the color holes like that.
So then coloring is it is way more complex than I had this mindset of like Microsoft Paint, where you take the little fill can and you drag over and you click and it fills a little spot, and if you goof up it fills the whole picture.
You can kind of do that with some of the older comics, like the old Casper ones and so forth, because the line art is so clean and everything's enclosed. You can literally just go in and use the fill tool and you get the whole thing colored.
Fill.
Yeah,
Okay.
Flatting is kind of like that. Like just when you're laying in all your colors that are the basis for the art. So like if you're coloring Captain America, and you do like use solid colors as your foundation that you then add your shading and your highlights and everything in to from there.
So,
but it is kind of like that. It's similar to that, just fill. But that's kind of the boring part of coloring. I think.
Those are the longest part.
Yeah, it's
and that's
for me, it's the least enjoyable.
It's called flatting. That's the first step.
Yep. You actually use people who work specifically as flatters, so you can take on more coloring projects at once. Basically, give the pages to them; they'll flat the pages for you, and then you basically just work. All the work focus on is the rendering.
Okay. So, is coloring now? I guess maybe on there's different aspects of it, but coloring now compared to, let's say, 70 years ago, is it easier now that you have these programs that you can make your own layers and change everything, or is it do you need a very special skill set combined with your artistic skill? Does that question make sense? Rather than being, I feel like an artist with either a pen or a paintbrush. Now you need to have that artistic skill plus everything Jeremy just said. With knowing
have a script to automate the whole process.
Yeah, is it easier now or just different?
I'd say digital is far more convenient.
Yeah.
You don't have to have a whole setup of tools and like Dr. Martin's dyes, but I would say there's a lot more variety with modern coloring. Like, there's just so much you can just take out of the blue, and so much, like, I know as an artist, I take for granted. I don't know if I could pull a Marie Severin. When she started out in comics, she was a colorist, and just the amount of work you have to do to traditionally color for print the way they were is just, it's a lot. It's a lot to process.
The only thing with digital coloring now that probably makes a little more of a pain is since you're digital painting. Since you're coloring digitally, everything's in pixels, which means if you release the comic digitally, people get to zoom right in and see every little thing you've done.
Oh.
So that actually makes it a little more frustrating, because then you have to be even more careful in coloring to make sure you have as little mistakes as possible, because any error you have will be found.
Oh, that's interesting. I never would have thought of that.
It's it's interesting because I think in some respects, I mean, as a colorist today, you have to be more artistic. You have to have more of a knowledge of light and shadow and how it works and everything, because, you know, back in the 80s and early 90s, before the transition to computer coloring really happened, you were just you were kind of just flatting. You weren't doing that much tone work. It was, your job was mostly to separate planes, so you didn't want to have the same sort of tones on top of tones. Your job was to push characters back and forth, make them stand out from the background. And, you know, that was really your job as a colorist back in the 80s. You weren't complementing, I think, the pencils and inks as much as you are today. Like now, a colorist today, as much as they can enhance art and make it look much better, they can also kind of ruin art if they go and do too much. You know, they can detract from the pencil and ink work if they do too much. And that really wasn't a problem in the 80s. Yeah, I don't think you could. I think you'd have to try really hard to do a bad coloring job in the 80s. And I don't think you have to try as hard now. Like, I think you can, you know, you can screw something up by just doing too much today. Whereas back in the 80s, I don't think you could.
I've seen some people oversaturate comic art to the point where it's like, that's a problem. They'll add K, they'll add black colors to make it darker, and then it'll just get super muddy and just really gross looking. I'm so scared of that. I tend to make mine a little too light and a little too faded looking. And then I'm like, oh no, but you cannot add K to like just flat color. Or if you want to color darker, just add more blue, add more like of those colder colors to it. So there's definitely, I think in the 90s, that was a big thing when computer coloring really got introduced.
Yeah.
People were just like, oh, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What you really do is put a reference point, a color reference point on your page somewhere, and basically make that the medium, the middle ground color. Anything above that color in saturation is be the brighter point. The farther up you go from that middle point, the more brighter that piece that is going to be. The lower it goes, the less saturated it's going to be. So it's good to have one little point on the page somewhere.
It's interesting. In the first issue of File 13 it's interesting because what I saw on my screen is not what I ended up printing. You have to be careful about that too, because I think I went a little dark, and like pages that were dark ended up being really dark when they came off the press. And I was just like, oh, it wasn't terrible, but it was just a lot darker than what I was working with on my screen. So that's something to definitely be careful about.
Oh yeah, I've ruined many prints just being like, oh, I'll just tune this up a bit, and it comes out looking like I poured blood all over it. Like, what happened? Just it's such a hard line to follow of having that perfect amount of color.
It's always good to have at least an adjustment layer right below the line art, so you can adjust the brightness or saturation to all the colors beneath it. So after you print it, you need to adjust it. You just go that one layer and you fix it just like that if you need to.
Yeah, that's good advice.
Yeah.
And before digital, that you didn't have this option, right? I mean, what would you do if you would you just start over the whole page with colors? You'd have the black and white copy, right?
Yeah, basically.
Screwed up.
Yeah, you would get a Xerox on like good quality paper. This is what we did at Marvel. This was part of my job as an assistant editor. It's really just a glorified trafficker of moving boxes of FedEx in the morning and then moving them to other people. But it was you would make Xerox of the inks, and then you would send them. This is before email was everywhere, so you would package them up, send them to the colorist, and then they would color. And yeah, you'd send them 2 or 3 of each page in case they screwed up, because you'd start over. Back then it wasn't like, oh, I'll just undo.
Yeah, there's no controls.
I just did that. They ended up not looking so good. You couldn't do that back then.
Yeah, it's so interesting because everything you say, all the tools that are at your disposal, you have so much to learn. I feel like in the process, because there's so much. The programs, Adobe and whatever, I don't know what else you're using, are so powerful. There's so many things to learn. But once you have them there at your disposal, there's so much more you can do, and so much more efficient. And Dan, you're saying, it wasn't that long ago, but pre-email being being able to transfer huge files and so forth. Yeah, you were moving physical pieces of paper.
Yeah, that was a huge part of my job, was going to the mailroom in the morning, coming back to the office with like 15 FedEx boxes, and then making sure I had 15 or 20 more to send out by the end of the day to keep everything chugging along. And now I probably don't use FedEx for anything anymore, I would imagine, at this point. Like, what do you have to mail? Everything could be done.
Yeah.
digitally.
Yeah. So this would be a good time to transition to. So what we have at our disposal now, and so much efficiency in how you can work and just undo. And I've watched that the guys that are working. I mean, Alex can't. He's penciling by hand right now. And see, Michael, I don't know if are you doing digitally right now, or can we see your screen at all?
Yeah, hold on.
I've watched these guys, and I'll watch, and they're inking or whatever, and then it just disappears. Everything they just did, 3 minutes of work, and then disappears, and which is pretty incredible. So yeah, I've seen his work. What else?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was saying, you don't want to rely too much on the undo though, because depending on what type of computer you have, you need a lot of RAM to get a good list. So as you're going through the thing, you'll see you get each step you make is listed in the history section, and if it gets too long, it starts bogging down the program, and it gets to the point where you may not even be able to do anything at all. I've run into problems where I can't even save, I can't even use a selection tool. It won't even make a team at all for anything. And that's because I've added up so much memory in the RAM, a lot of it due to the history function.
Okay. Oh, I never would have thought of that.
Yep, and that's why I have a very expensive video editing rig.
Huh. I see. Told you I'm clueless. What else? Maybe we don't have to cover the history of coloring or in art linearly. We can go back and forth. What else is at your disposal now that artists didn't have 10, 20, or before? What is available now that even a few years ago, or you can say 50 years ago, what do you have now in your toolboxes?
I mean, I think the biggest change is just how digital everything is. Everything, if you go back to the early 90s, people did color. It was weird because there was a time like in the 90s when there was colorists, and then there were color separators, they called them. But color separators were pretty much just coloring in Photoshop. So they would take the color guide that someone had done, with either markers or dyes, and then they would translate those into Photoshop. And because the color, there was such a pretty new technology that colorists didn't know how to do it. And then I guess over time, by the late 90s and early 2000s, it was like, if you were going to be a comic colorer, you had to know how to use a computer. And if you didn't, then you didn't. And it was weird that there was that step in between. I guess it was just because there was a transition time when people had to learn the program. So they had two separate people that were doing it. I think it was one of the reasons why Marvel acquired Malibu in 1994 or 5 or what it was because Malibu was at the cutting edge of like comic coloring with the computers, and they wanted that ability to do that. So
if only we had somebody we could ask about that.
I know. There's someone you have to ask about that would know much better than I would. So but I think that's the biggest change is just the computer itself. I mean, I don't know. There's as a colorist.
Now you have programs that basically color the page for you. You just put the image in and point. Basically, the idea is you have an image. You take little color marks, like you want the head to be blue, put a little dot of blue there. You want the clothes to be red, put a little dot of red there. And then you start the program, automatically color the entire thing for you. And then you have to go in and just do a few minor adjustments, you're done.
That's incredible. So modern colorists, do the old timers, back in my day, do you get any of that? Do you hear any of that at all? Back in my day, we had to color with charcoal and Blood.
2 miles up and down hill both ways.
I say I had the blood.
Yeah.
I don't have that much contact with any of the colorists I used to work with. There's a couple guys I could ask that I think most of them learned Photoshop, so they learned how to do it, the modern way. Otherwise, I think you just got left behind. There wasn't really any room to be a traditional colorist anymore because it was just one extra step that they didn't need to pay someone for, so. But I don't know. I don't know if there's old grumpy people that used to color the old way.
Do they teach? Is it Elena? Do they teach that at all anymore? The old way?
Like, we do have traditional coloring classes, but they're not for comics, like, directly. It would be like we learn how to paint, which would also, like, all the coloring fundamentals that we learn in that class, we can apply to digital, but then we have a specific digital class. So it's really, I hate to say it, but coloring comics, if it's not like watercolor for like aesthetic effects, it's kind of a dead medium, which is awful a bit. I like traditional stuff, like a traditional inking, but it's,
I'm not on a typewriter. I
Yeah.
love old stuff, but yeah, you're right. I mean, being able to
I'm
share.
surprised that someone hasn't kind of married the two together though, and like used an old. Because I figured like you could take if someone's a type penciler, right? You could take their type pencils and you could traditionally color it with markers or dyes or whatever, and then have the ink to line work, and then just make that your black channel over your traditionally colored, colors, and then you could clean it up if you needed to. But I always thought that would be there. There was a guy, Joe Rosas, in the 1990s who colored a bunch of stuff for us, and his color guides were amazing. They were like beautiful, and I always just wanted to like scan his color guides and put them in the comics because they were the color separators, who are pretty much the computer colors. They never got it right, and then nothing ever looked as good as his color guides. And it was always like, I just want to scan his stuff and put it in the book. But even that was something where it was weird because like I think Marvel used to scan the line art higher than they would have the colored art in. Everything was a weird time where people just didn't like scan and keep everything at the same resolution. And I don't know. It was, but I don't know why people didn't think to just take some of those steps out of the process much earlier than they did.
We got a question. Royal Airships in the YouTubes asks, has anyone ever seen an entirely monochromatic comic, not black and white, but within like the 30 Shades of Blue? Is it feasible, and would it be easier to color or more of a pain? I would say that I have seen one. Midtown Comics had a special of Champions not too long ago that was the 30 Shades of Blue, but I don't know what the colorists would feel about getting that assignment in their inbox.
Well, I can get close to answering that maybe, because when I did some work for American Mythology, I did a couple issues of their Three Stooges comics, and the point of that was to color the whole thing like an old black and white short. The whole thing had to be done in a grayscale, basically. So basically, and due to how the grayscale works, the difference between the foreground background, normally you have the darker colors in the back front and lighter colors in the back. But you're doing grayscale, that kind of doesn't work the same way. So you do have to sort of adjust your approach to the comic page when coloring in grayscale, or I assume it would be the same for the other one as well.
I got 2 books I absolutely adore that are monochromatic. You got Shoplifter by Michael Cho, and you got Parker, illustrated by Darwin Cook. And those are some of like my biggest art influences. Those are just like Parker is just one color and then black and white. And it's just such a beautiful, like very illustration heavy looking book. And so is Shoplifter. And I highly recommend those. They're both graphic novels. I think there's more than one Parker book, but they're fabulous.
So I'll divert a little from our timeline discussion here to talk about what is the thought process behind sticking with monochromatic or black and white. Why would an artist pick that? Why would that decision be made?
Well, first thing I can think of is costs. It does cost down. You're not putting colors down.
Yeah.
I think it just conveys kind of a lot more, or not a lot more. It's definitely a choice that's more like it's an emotional drive of the piece. Like with Parker, for example, it's a noir type story, so it has almost that like Steranko-y feel of just like black and white and then one color, but it gives it this like very more heavy tone. And with that one color, they can choose the mood of the whole story versus like having to be like, oh, it's night, so now there's like this many colors and that, but it's just one color and it's just the amount you put in gives it the oomph.
Yeah.
It factor.
And from an editor standpoint, collectability. If we're doing like a partnership with a dealer or something, and they want to give them something special, say you can, you're giving the colors to challenge where we'll get into it later about the psychology of colors. Is say I need you to do all that, but only in this range, and you're going to give it only to this vendor. So now the colors are saying like, I worked really hard on this. This is a great challenge. I really improved my skill. They're blowing that on social media. The vendor gets it, and now people in that area want to be part of that experience, want to collect what is essentially a giant work exercise, but it seems like there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears put into this one special issue, different from all the others in print.
Any other thoughts?
I think that covers. I mean, it's really just the coloring you always want to complement. Like you're just talking about like the choice of whether it's monochromatic, black and white, but like just over the overall idea of the coloring is it has to complement the art, right? So it's like if the art's very, very, black and white, very high contrast, you're probably not going to go in and do a lot of modeling and everything. You're going to want your color choices to accentuate what's already there, not to overpower it or muddy it up.
Yeah, I don't know. Does it fall into that less is more concept? You can say a lot more. And Elena, you were saying you limit your choices, and then when you do throw in something, it really stands out. If you use a billion colors, it's lost in the mix. But if you use just a handful, and then that one color is meaningful, it can be used for specific moments. I'm thinking of like Schindler's List, the girl with the brown coat, that she stood out. So the artistic idea is to be able to have the impact of something simple, something, and then
in comics, Frank Miller kind of did that with the Sin City stuff.
Yes.
So that this is like a comic equivalent to Schindler's List. But yeah, it just has a lot of impact when you have that one color, especially in something that's black and white.
Cool. Well, I hope that answered Rory's question there. Let's see. So back to chronology of comic book art. Back in the beginning, it was colored, and I gotta minimize my screen here. I'm sorry. I gotta click here. We had, if you guys aren't experts on the 1840s beginning of comic books, when did the dots? What is that called? Not Ben, or was it Ben Day?
Yeah,
that was later. There were dots before that. What was the name of that?
Zipatone? No.
You don't know the answer. We can move on. I don't want us to sit here and.
Well, I mean, that was just the color separation process, right? Where there was I described something from comicsbulletin.com that kind of explained it but I was trying to figure out how it used to be done. If you want, I can read. It's like 3 paragraphs or something. Like, take a second. Okay, it says, for the first 50 years or so of comic book history, the colors you saw were made up of 3% of each of the 3 primary colors. So cyan, yellow, and magenta. A 25% dot, a 50% dot, and 100% or solid color. Various combinations that could be made up, added up to a palette of 64 colors, though many of them, especially among the darker colors, were indistinguishable and were rarely used. The black and white artwork, originally drawn at twice the printed size, was shrunk down and reduced and printed on sheets of clear acetate. 9 copies were made of each page, one for each of the 3% of the colors. And then, a colorist would then put down the percentages. So skin tone was 25% magenta, 25% yellow. And then you would color in the 25% one and you color in the 25 yellow one. And it's remarkable what it was the job of the separator to interpret the color guides created by the colorist, breaking down the colors of the page into the components of red, yellow, and blue. So where a colorist would color Green Lantern using green, he would mark down that it was 100% yellow and 100% blue, and then the separators would do all that work. And it was just like, I remember reading somewhere that it was just rooms full of people, but mostly women, that would do all of the color separations. I don't know why they were mostly women. I knew a guy that did it in the late 80s, but before everything started to go digital.
And Roy pointed it out, and I went to the Google machine. But those dots, Scott, are Ben Day dots, invented in honor of Benjamin Henry Day. He created a technique in 1879 as a way to create areas of color in prints while minimizing the amount of ink used. That's according to mindbounce.com.
All right. Ben Day process are the dots that we see in the comic book, the classic comic book art or the pulp art as well. And it, Dan, you talk about the sheer volume of people involved, and I would assume as well as the levels of work that are necessary. That seems to me like another limiting factor in how much color or how much time you can spend on coloring a comic.
Yeah, like back then, I don't know. Like when I worked in graphic design in the 90s, and when I first started taking graphic design courses in college, we were learning like the hand mechanicals and everything. And it just gets to a point where it's like I don't understand how anyone finished anything in a timely manner or made any money before computers did everything. It's like it's mind-boggling, like how much, like even doing a book that has photographs in it, you would have to like contact somebody and they would send you slides, and then you would look through slides to find the photos to use in the book, and then they'd send you a print, and then you'd have to photo the print. It's insane. It's I don't know. Like I said, I don't know how anyone did anything in a timely manner and made any money doing anything before computers came along. It's just crazy.
And so it seems like we keep coming back to, like, I feel like, as with anything, computers are the quantum leap in our lives. The modern era is like everything pre-computers, and then computers, everyone's lives changed. It seems like it was really almost the same process from the 1800s and till when? The 80s, right, Jeremy?
Yep.
And what did you find? You were saying IBM created what was their program or?
Yeah, it's called Joy Paint. Basically, it was a program developed by IBM, and the interface is actually a joystick. And this is like basically over a decade before Photoshop, back in the early 1980s. I don't think it was for comic, but I know that it was done for like freehand drawing, coloring. I know some of it actually used stuff similar like AutoCAD's used today for industrial blueprints and such.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, from then up through the 80s, it was all the Ben Day dots and layers and layers of what's the paper?
Acetate.
Acetate.
Yeah, and then I guess they would take each acetate piece and then shoot it through a screen, which would create the proper amount of dots that would have to go on to the final plate eventually, which was used for printing. So 25% magenta, I guess, would have 25% as many dots as a full magenta would. And it's, yeah. So, and I know there was a process, I remember when I was in school again, that you could shoot like a piece of art with a special camera that would, first you'd filter out the cyan, the yellow, the magenta, and would shoot black. Then you'd filter out the black, and you just, so you could shoot like a full color piece of art and get it into its, 4 component colors that make it up. But I don't know why maybe it was too expensive a process to do with a color guide for a comic book or something. I'm not sure why that process wouldn't have been used. I don't know why having a bunch of people paint on 9 different pieces of acetate would have been a more cost-effective way to do things, but maybe using the camera was very expensive or something, but I don't know. They must have done it for some. Like I was thinking back to like for The Dark Knight, the first Dark Knight in 1986 with Lynn Varley's colors. That must have been shot because that wasn't done with color separations. You can see, how painterly that is, and you can see her brushstrokes and everything in that. So that must have been shot in a different. Probably for those prestige books, they took the production values a little higher than what they used to do. I would think. I'm not sure if anyone knows.
So would that be would that process you're talking about? Would that be a choice based on economics or ease of production, or was that an artistic choice?
I would think it was probably an economics decision. Like back then, they were just trying to make comics, and then for the printing, they obviously didn't care that much about. They were printing them on newsprint, so I don't think they cared too much about the quality of how everything looked once it was finally printed out, really, until you get to when the people start doing more prestige artistic sort of comics. I guess that started probably, I don't know, probably in the 80s, right? I'm trying to think of what would be a good threshold for when comics kind of went. I remember in the 80s, DC had their whole comics aren't just for kids campaign in 84, 5, 6 when Watchmen came out and Dark Knight. So maybe that's kind of when people started paying more attention to production value and looking at them more as pieces of art instead of just disposable entertainment.
So there's other things you can do now. So the thing that comes to mind, with a more modern, and I say modern, I mean really since digital and later, certain effects you can do. If you wanted a sunburst effect in old comics, you would draw, and it would be lines, and it would be I guess it sounds silly, but a more traditional comic book effect. But now you can do those crazy effects where it looks like light and real reflections, and I don't know the terms for it, so I'm exposing my ignorance here.
Well, they do have there's a couple ways to go about it. The first way, obviously, is the gradient tool. But another way to go about it is Photoshop is, also used for photographs. And so they actually do have a photo burst mode as well as a lens flare mode in Photoshop. So you actually add a lens flare to the page if you wanted to.
Sure. And is that common practice?
Lens
it depends wherever working on it, I guess.
Okay.
Lens flares were common practice in the 90s for sure. People used a lot, probably too much, but
because it was new.
It was new, yeah. It was but I remember the lens flares showing up in a lot of things in the 90s. Not just comic art, but just any sort of ads or any place where you could add a lens flare. You did. Kind of like when GIFs first showed up and people would put them all over their GeoCities websites and stuff.
I'm afraid to comment on this. I actually added a lens flare to one of the crate pages I was doing.
Am I really aging myself right now? Am I showing what a
you're so old.
I am from a different age.
So old. What's the the current trend in colors. Elena, you're hip and cool and with it.
Yeah, I was born in 2000. So modern comics, a big thing that I use a lot, and I know a lot of modern arts are doing, are knockouts. So that's another layer over the ink layer that has color. So then instead of like having just a black line, you could have like a reddish black line. And it's basically, it gives it like almost a faded, sometimes more pastel-y look. There's just so many textures you can add nowadays. Like if you want sand texture, you can just look up an image of sand and just plop it right down. Sand. I think it's starting to adjust. It's starting to calm down since the 90s. Because I wasn't alive in the 90s, but I have a lot of comics from the 90s.
You've heard of them. You've heard of the 90s.
I'm a collector. It's crazy. But yeah. It was wild, but I'm thinking it's definitely calming down. But people are also making it almost look photorealistic.
Yeah.
And some people with that will even just like take a picture from a background and make it blurry and put that as the background, which I think is horrible.
Yeah.
I think those people are cheaters and they need to stop. But yeah, there's a lot more like little ways people are trying to make like their lives easier while still making the artwork look good and very photorealistic, which can be good, but sometimes it's like it's art and you need to keep it art.
Yeah.
Don't try to, if it was a pictures, just take pictures and put them in a comic. But yeah, I don't know if that explained anything except for my hatred of
right. Dan's comment, I love it, about the early days of designing your own web page when you'd have the dancing Jesus and the hamsters and the flames and the.
Yeah. You want to know what that's like? Just look up the Space Jam website, still up there. So
Yeah.
I think like that's the problem. It's like all of it when you realize because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something.
Exactly.
Yes.
And I think that's a hard impulse to control sometimes. When all of a sudden you have all these cool new things you can do, and it's like you want to do all of them, but you have to like pump the brakes a little bit.
Again,
except for the guy who did Jesus riding a dinosaur as this miniseries, he should absolutely continue that.
We need more of that.
Yes.
I know one of the big things right now is since you have iPads and in your phones, you can still technically color and draw while on the go.
Mm-hmm.
I know plenty of artists still do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tommy says he takes his tablet to conventions and you can put it up on this big screen, let everybody see exactly what you're doing. It's really cool. And you're just taking a tablet, right? And use it. Is there a stylus?
Yeah, you get stylus for it. You get styluses that are basically shaped like paintbrushes if you want.
That's cool.
And if you want to get real fancy, buy yourself a little hologram projector and basically project the image on your computer as you're drawing it.
Is that a
yes,
thing?
It is. It is a thing.
Okay. I see. I'm learning. I had no idea. That's incredible. So yes, now we have hologram projectors, and I don't think the pre-World War II comic book artists and colorists had anything like that. So then, what has been the evolution not of the technology and the how, but the style? We've talked about what's popular now and what we could do in the 90s just because we could. Way back when, it was a matter of efficiency. If you were churning out comic book after comic book after comic book, I mean, even the writing style we have, they say the Marvel style of writing. Stan and Jack were just making comic books. Same thing was true with art, right? You could only put so much effort into the inks and the colors before you had to move on to the next. So what has changed style-wise because out of necessity or just style and art since early days of comics to today? and I'm talking like use of primary colors, use of different tones and shades and so forth.
We're focusing on like web comics type stuff or print, because you have the RGB versus CMYK, and in RGB you get a wider spectrum.
Go just if you're gonna either one. If you want to talk about print, go for it. Talk about digital, go for it.
Well, I was thinking, I guess we'll go to web, because basically if you working on for specifically web comics or things that are going to be digital first, if you work in RGB, you have a much wider range or much wider spectrum of colors to use. And if you're doing printing, obviously you're much more limited. But with that wider range, you can get much more saturated colors, much more darker colors, and they will display. I mean, the boundaries have to be calibrated on each side, but you can more or less get a much, I guess, wider palette and much more expressions you can show through the colors as a result.
Digitally, if it's all digital, okay. And so, print
that with coloring nowadays, as opposed to going back 30, 40 years, I think it's a much more important part. Like it's much more a part of the art than it was. I think 40 years ago it was more of an afterthought. It was just something you had to make sure Captain America's colors were right, Spider-Man's colors were right, and other people's, everything, the colors were right, and that people stood out, and that was it. It was pretty much an afterthought. But now I think it's much more of a compliment to what's going on in the art. And then in some respects, the colorist is just as, maybe not just as important as the penciler, but I think it might be as important a job as the inker is. Because inkers might be, they might be out of the equation somewhere down the line. People start going all digital and just kind of sad. I love inking, and I used to like inking other people's work, but that could be a job that's on the chopping block at some point, just because it's might not be necessary. But the colorist has become much more important to what the finished art looks like. It has much more impact on what the finished piece ends up being, I think, than it's used, much more than it used to, for sure.
So early comics, very simple. You're right. The lot of, and I keep saying primary colors. I mean, it's just a lot of simple. Captain America's blue, Daredevil's red, yellow, then red, and Iron Man's gray for a while, and then yellow for a while. Very simple. You're right. It seems like, well, it's the last thing that needs to be done. We need to just get the color on there, and now there's so much more that can be done, and you have to have that artistic eye, and to know with the shading and reflections and all of that. It's a lot.
You have to be able to interpret what the penciler and the inker have done about like where reflecting light might be coming from, where you want to add dramatic lighting, or because some of them put a lot of thought and time into where the shadows are lying, and if you color something to where it doesn't quite work, it's not gonna. You can mess the whole thing up, really. Ruin the mood of a page with coloring, or you can make something that's okay, great. On the opposite end of the spectrum, a colorist can really elevate mediocre work to a higher level, or they can take great work and bring it down to a lower level. Whereas I think that was not close to it. Anyone could have colored a comic probably 40 years ago. Really, I'm not sorry.
Colorists have.
I hope no one from coloring comics from 40 years ago is listening, because they'll get mad at me. And there was occasional rush jobs at Marvel where if you had artistic talent and you could take a couple pages home with you and color them, you would do that and bring them in, and you would. So it's like, it wasn't like, I don't think it's to the level where it is now. Like, I don't know if today they would just let you color like Ron Garney's art just because they need to get a book out tomorrow or something. I don't think that would happen now. But Spider-Man Adventures in 1995, that's different. Crank that out overnight.
So what are some good examples of coloring, if you haven't. I know it might be. That's kind of for me. That's kind of a obscure kind of question to think of a specific title. Lena, you mentioned the black and white or the monochrome titles that you really loved, and I think it's funny because those really stand out. Those are the ones that stick in your mind because they're different. And Tim, you were saying that that's a different thing. People will want that, and you make it the desirable, hard to get thing. Are there any? We don't have to talk about anything currently. Can you think of any examples of good colors that have stuck in your mind, or bad stuff that have stuck in your mind?
From currently, or just from any time?
Any time is fine.
I guess a good colorist that I really like is Dave Stewart. Once again, worked with Darwin Cook. Just a lot of texture. It almost looks like he did it traditional with the amount of like almost paper noise he put down when coloring, which I think looks great. I do it on my own work because I think if it looks too like shiny or like plasticky, it, doesn't feel like it's an actual object or anything. So I definitely like his stuff. It's not oversaturated.
Can you explain what paper noise is?
So noise is basically, it's strange to describe, like the texture you would add to an overall thing. Like even on Photoshop, there's a little window in a filter that says like add noise, and basically it separates, like if you had a layer of solid blue, you would separate that into many little different pixels. Like one would be blue, one would be like darker blue, white, and so until like from far away it looks like that color, but then you get up close and it's just a bunch of little colors making up the one big color. So it's basically texture, just a fun way of saying it.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, the first, I think, coloring I'd mentioned her before, but Lynn Barley on The Dark Knight was some of the first coloring that I think I ever saw in a comic that stood out to me as being exceptional and just looked different than everything else. The modern, and also the same era, John Higgins on Watchmen was great. That was more traditional comic coloring, but his color palette that he used was really very interesting and cool. And modern guy Matt Hollingsworth, I really like a lot coloring now. I think his stuff is pretty awesome. He's pretty, I wouldn't say he's understated, but he doesn't oversaturate. He does that, like his stuff works really well, and I like to look at his coloring a lot.
So sorry, my cat is at the door. I have to quickly.
Do what you got to do. Jeremy, what thought when you got the projects? And so tell everybody what you're working on again right now for Silverline.
Well, right now I'm working on the one that's been kickstarted, Bloodline. I'm also working on in the future. I'm working on pages for Cray.
Okay, so when you get these projects and you look at the inked art, what goes through your mind? What's the process you take to? Go ahead.
Well, one of the first things I try to do is figure out similar comics or animation or movies, whatever, that are in the same type of genre or have the same type of storytelling style. Then I basically collect a bunch of reference images or screenshots from those specific mediums, and either I try to source colors from them or try to create a color palette around them. I mean, a very easy way to do this is, like when I was doing when I started working on the Cray stuff, I got a bunch of Conan the Barbarian ones, Hercules, a bunch of those old fancy, magic and my fancy stuff.
Yeah.
I got those images, and then in Photoshop, you take the image into Photoshop, you go to image, you go to mode, and then basically you change it to, I think it's the bitmap mode. It's like bitmap mode. Then basically once it's there, you can index the image. by indexing it, you can go ahead and create a pre-made color palette based on that specific image. So instead of having to create your own color palette, like put yellow here, black here, whatever, you basically takes every single color that's in that image and creates an entire color palette around that automatically. And then I can just import or export that and import that into the comic as I'm working. As a result, I now have the fantasy color palette based on other previous works that I can just pull from. And make adjustments here and there as I'm going.
You keep like blowing my mind with what you can do with just color. It's so cool.
Yeah, honestly, a lot of the stuff I learned from Ben Huizinga, his name wrong, Huizinga or something. I don't want to say his name wrong, but Ben Huizinga, I'll say. He was a colorist at Archie and DC Comics and so forth. I forgot what school he teaches at now, but he's at one of the schools in the Midwest, I think. Basically, I was able to get some private lessons with him at one point, where he told me a lot of these inside coloring tricks that he learned while doing digital coloring.
Elaine, I don't know if you heard my question. I asked Jeremy, so he gets a project, he gets an inked page. What are the steps you would take? What's next for you? So you get these pages. What happens next? And go ahead and tell everybody what you're currently working on to remind our viewers.
So I'm currently working on a new book that's going to come out really soon. I'm almost done with it. White Devill. It's kind of like albino Conan the Barbarian. It's the best way I think I can describe it. It's fun. I guess when I first get the pages, I go through, I make sure it's all like nothing's askew or too crazy. If I have any questions, I'll email editors, artists, whatnot. And then I go in and I separate the line art from the white. So it's, I'm able to flat the comic. And then I flat it. I flat the comic. And then above that, I do a layer of shadow, which I tend to go with like blue, purple, like those darker, colder colors. Unless the image is closer, then I try to go with warmer colors in the shadows because that'll bring it closer. Because things that are cold colors go farther back because atmospheric perspective, and then warmer colors stay up front. And then after that, I go over and I do highlight, which is another layer. And then I usually do a layer of tone between that, which would almost make it have that paper noise, which I said earlier. And then after that, I go in with a tiny bit of KO maybe. It really matters what the comic or project is. And then I send it over once the whole book is done. I usually don't send in page after page because that would be just like kind of a nightmare receiving like 20 separate emails with 20 separate JPEGs.
Yes.
So yeah, that's kind of my process. It really changes with like whatever artist I'm working with, or if I'm working on my own stuff, then it's a different, like not too different of a process. But I always use Photoshop. I don't really like Clip Studio for flatting, and yeah. Okay.
And then so the artistic side of it. What thought process? No, you answered my question. Thank you. What for both of you? Anybody who does coloring, Jeremy, Dan, Elena, how much thought goes into that? And I understand sometimes I don't know if you guys are so pressed for time that you gotta get it done, but do you stop and think what's the mood you want to set? What's the feeling? What are the tones that you want to have in this story?
Yep. There was this on the Bloodline comic I was doing. There's this one panel which was really great. It's like one of these sort of like a shooting up the vampires or the hate brains explode and everything. But I didn't want colors straight on colors. I wanted it to be something a little more impactful. Now that page had a lot of spot black on it. So what I did was I basically got rid of pretty much black on the entire. I basically did a color pull in all the black, and then I basically using that I created 2 layers of color, and the 2 colors as a result created this dynamic where there's like I think it's like green or red. It's one of these things where the color stands out much more due to the difference in the I can't pronounce this now, but it's just much more impactful as a result, and it goes along with the image of the characters being shot and so forth, and you don't have to basically draw every single gory detail as a result.
Yeah. Oh, Elena, did you have anything you can say? If anybody
Yes.
has no, nothing to add. Shut up, Scott. Next topic. If you
No. My process, I usually tend to it really matters what the tone or the environment they're in, and I usually base the entire color palette, clothing, skin tone, everything off of that. So if it's like a nighttime scene, but if it's in a city, I might have more blues, but oranges as well, like to think about street lights. And I'm always thinking about complementary colors, what will look good, what will be too harsh. It's a balance. It's, yeah. And always keeping in mind not to oversaturate.
So it's a movie reference, and I apologize. I know we're talking comic books, but has everybody seen Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
I love that movie.
Good. That is, I think that's done in post production, and I don't know, but that movie has that tan washed out hue to the whole thing, and that gives it a feeling, a tone of that Depression Dust Bowl kind of depressed South in the 1930s, and I think it's really cool. So when you see behind the scenes of a movie like that where they don't have that effect, it doesn't look right.
Well, in Photoshop, if you go to the saturation area, there's actually a drop-down menu. We can change the colors on a page or certain where we select to sepia, to an old washed-out photograph, and it'll automatically create that type of mood for you if you need it.
Yeah, and I think it's to great effect if it's not overused. Dan and I have been talking about how the colors for Steam Patriots are going to look, and it takes place the end of the 1700s, the Revolutionary War, and we haven't settled on it. I don't know. I'm going to defer to Dan. But we talked about how we want the red of a British military coat to stand out, and we want the blue of George Washington's coat to stand out. And so we may have more muted colors throughout the story where certain things will stand out. And then the effect of there's going to be a little bit of the hero, Felix, he can remember things really well, but he has to recall it. And so we want to have a difference in color for when he's using his superpower.
And then when he's flashbacks too, you'd have another experience that it's obvious what is happening in the present and what's not. Yeah.
So
there's a lot of different things to keep track of. There is a lot of things you can convey with color now that you couldn't do quite as easily back in the day. But like flashbacks especially, I think there's a thing where you can very easily just bring your color palette down a bit or go for a monochrome sort of feel, and you can instantly convey that this is not happening at the same time as he was in the previous panel.
Mm. So, sorry, I'm reading my notes here. What do the colors? What can they convey? And so the most apparent thing would be the heroes versus villains, and a certain color. And is there psychology behind that, or is that just because they decided?
No, there is.
What's that?
There is yellow. Yellow's actually color particularly reserved for heroes. Purple is for villains. Purple has poison and stuff like that. Bad omens for purple. Yellow, bright, happy. You obviously don't want your villain to be bright and happy. That's kind of contradictory.
Right.
Yeah, I think if you look at the early Marvel comics, a vast majority of the villains are purple and green, kind of Hulk's colors too, which is, what does that say about the Hulk? But Doctor Doom is green, the Green Goblin is green and purple. Kang is green and purple. There's like just a whole slew of villains. If you start looking at them, you notice that there's a very similar color palette to most of them.
And Jeremy was nice enough to send me a psychology chart which matches the colors to their different emotions or what they do for the reader. So I have that pulled up on stream now.
So you got that up there? Cool, because I found a link on just a quick psychologytoday.com. Green's link to more creative thinking. This is not comic books related, but it's just the psychology of it. Red, of course, it's a more attractive color. It's strength. And then like passion, like even just like food and strength. Violet is a sophistication. Purple, yellow. Yellow is interesting because I got another list here that puts a lot of sidekicks as using yellow. But I guess Wolverine, he used yellow, right?
And he has
yellow and blue initially, right?
Yellow and blue. Yeah,
like
blue.
a brownish costume. I don't know what he's wearing there.
Blue is trustworthiness. And I think blue is the most popular favorite color, other than maybe red. Those two are very popular as favorite colors. So blue and red going together. Gray. Gray is either a wise mentor. Or on the other side of it, maybe silver as a rich villain, a wealthy villain who'd be wearing a gray suit or something like that. So there's a lot of psychology that goes into the color. Then that goes back to like our conversation for the previous episodes where we talk about characters. You're telling a lot instantly. Instantly the reader, the audience knows something. But what about heroes that wear black? That's for you guys.
Are most of those are most of the heroes who wear black? Were not the vigilante ones, but more of the that term. Not like the suit thing.
More like an anti-hero, or
Yes, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
A reluctant hero.
yeah.
Well, I mean, what's interesting about that is like it can convey a lot. It can foreshadow, or it can like in Star Wars, in Return of the Jedi, when Luke shows up wearing black, it conveys a lot, and it kind of foreshadows the conflict he's going to have with the dark side later on. And in the first movie, he's all in white. It's just kind of like a transition from being the naive young, hero on his journey to someone that's confronting something very dark and dangerous that could consume him. And it kind of I think it prepares you as a viewer for maybe he is going to go to the dark side. You don't know, but I think that's interesting that you brought that up, that, the good guy in black, but it can also be used to kind of foreshadow I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself.
Okay. Yeah. Something also kind of happens a lot with that is if you do have a character that either was an anti-hero or was a hero that went through a sudden change, they might be getting a black costume to show that they're now concrete in their convictions, that they are a solid object. Whereas if the character is in a arc of change, their costume might be more white to show that either they are coming from a pure place or that they are able to receive, because what you can paint on white, you can't paint on black. One of my favorite runs of X-Men was spoilers for a run 5 years ago. Xavier's dead, and Magneto is the leader of the X-Men. And he bounces between an all white garb and an all black garb when he's questioning his position as their leader, what it means to be a mutant and a human, and what his forgiveness play in his position that he's in now. And so he'll go from seasons of conviction to seasons of doubt, and he'll go from black to white, respectively.
What it also reminds me of is lot of these also are visual cues from like old shows and stuff, like cowboy westerns. Yeah, the
Mhm.
black costume.
Mhm.
But another interesting thing about that, coloring for a second here, in those shows, the good guys would never exit the screen to the left. They always go to the right when coming onto the screen. That's because they always have to chase after the villains. So there's certain visual cues they can use in comics that automatically identify who is the bad guy and who's the good guy.
Yeah, it's very interesting because it's that psychology side of like, that's something I don't understand. Like why does red, why do we have a physical even psychological reaction to a color? But they understood that. They knew that with early films and then comics, we understand it. It's there. We may not be able to explain it, but we can use it for storytelling to convey meaning and feeling. What about villains that you Tim, you mentioned Magneto wearing white, right? There are other villains that wear white.
White Queen.
Mm-hmm.
Gentleman Ghost.
Say that again.
Gentleman Ghost.
What's the meaning with a villain wearing white?
He's a ghost, so he's white.
Solid.
Okay, all right. You can't have a purple ghost, I guess.
Well, yeah, I mean that's one of those things where it's ages of mythology built into dumb brain. So just like, it's a ghost. It's white naturally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about
But I'd say also to your point, Scott. Typically, white also has a lot of religious iconography with it, and so you see that a lot in art. That comes kind of from a particularly Japanese influence. So we have our own ideas of white and purity. So something like the Purifiers and X-Men, again, because I am an X-Men nerd, we're all white because they're the religious sanctified group. And Japanese culture, white and black are kind of flipped. So if something is the embodiment of the coming of the afterlife, they'll wear white because that is the absence of everything. So they're coming to remove.
I learned about that in a 30 Rock episode. Because, like, Liz Lemon, she bought, like, a wedding dress, and then everyone thought she was going to a Korean funeral. It was so weird. Fun fact.
30 Rock is gold. I love that show.
So well written.
So I love that we have these discussions because comic books and the visual medium, there's so much more to it, so much thought that goes into it. And yes, you've got silly comics that are just the movie equivalent of a popcorn blockbuster, but there's so much that has to go into the thought behind what's the villain going to look like, what's the background going to look like, what's the hero going to look like, and what's it going to convey with the fewest amount, with the least amount of effort for the consumer, for the viewer or the reader. It's so much more intelligent when you really just take a second to think about what is going into it to make it an amazing story and have everything going on in the background too of your mind that a lot of people don't stop and think about that, which is okay, fine. If they're entertained by a story, great. But when you think about the psychology behind it, it's so interesting. I love it. And some neutral characters. I don't know, the sidekicks. Earth tones. Oranges. I don't know who's orange out there.
That's a great question.
It says like he'd be like crossing guard. Like,
yeah. When Colossus his traditional costume was yellow, and red.
Yellow,
Two of our hero characters, yeah. And then when he's paired with Cable, he switches out to black and orange. It's like a similar like relationship, but it's much more dulled down. He's not the spotlight.
Then you got Aquaman.
Yep.
Aqualagny?
You forget about Aquaman.
Aquaman. Okay. And I wonder, like, what was the? I like in the Iron Man movie, Tony Stark picks his Iron Man colors because of his hot rod, right? And to be showy. But what was the thought process behind that in the comic book in the '60s? Was just because red means hero and bright, and yellow goes with it?
I think a lot of it's you're picking, complementary colors that look good together. So
yeah.
I don't know. I guess he went from the gray to the gold. And then I guess the next step is just to add red to that and just make them look a little more heroic instead of kind of dumpy looking.
Yeah.
So to make them more heroic, I guess you add red because it is. It's a bold, vibrant color. But I think I wonder, I'm sure a lot of thought, I wonder how much thought was given to the colors of some of the characters when obviously with Captain America you give them a lot of thought, but like when you're designing, when Ditko, I wonder if Ditko or Kirby designed Spider-Man's color costume. I know that Kirby drew Amazing Fantasy 15's cover, but Ditko did all the interiors. I don't know who. Does anyone know who designed Spider-Man? The costume?
I bet it was Steve Ditko.
Yeah, I think it would be too. But I wonder, if he had colors in mind when he was, drawing the webbing, or if it was just something. I don't know. I'd be interested to know, when you're designing. So a lot of times, if you're designing a character, if you're drawing, you're not necessarily thinking a ton about colors, depending on the character. You're making a costume that looks cool. And
so would they? You think they would have avoided black for him to so he wouldn't seem evil? Because blue and red for a spider, I mean.
Yeah, it's odd choice, right? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
No.
But it's colorful, and everything is color. Like you said, primary colors are so prevalent in that era of comic books. Really, there's no one that's not primary colors. No matter who it is, really. Even if it would make sense for them to be like black or a dark color, they were still more colorful than that. Like the Phantom Stranger or the Spectre. Spectre's like green and white, and he's wearing green underwear. It's kind of
weird. And then what about colors for backgrounds and scenery from our colorists? How much thought do you put into that? Is that on par with the characters in the scene?
Well, I think you have to be a little even more careful with the backgrounds, because you definitely don't want the backgrounds to overshadow the characters.
It has to be dulled down, but it also can't be too crazy down, or else your characters are just going to stand out too much. It really, it all has to matter what will be complementary to the characters' costumes, or if you're basing the costumes off the environment. Let's say they're at the beach. You can't just have the sand be straight up yellow, or else it'll look like they're walking on nacho cheese. You gotta have a good balance of every color and making sure it, conveys the direct emotion also. Because if you could do a scene at the beach where things are supposed to be unhappy or scary, I guess movie references, Jaws, you got blood in the water. It's a bright red. It's not like a dull red. It shows, there is violence happening. And so that also has to be shown in the environment. There's so many bright colors on that beach scene, but not a lot of calmness in the colors. So it's important to have the background colors match the emotion and match the story as well.
Also, this is for the artist side, not the color side, but when creating the page, depending on the type of character you're using, you want to be very careful of how the character is placed on the page. I got one anecdote I got from the Colors Dimension working the Sonic on the Archie on the Sonic comic. Sonic is blue. A lot of the scenes take place outside, meaning a lot of blue skies.
Yeah.
Unless there's no water, it's blue. So trying to color a blue character when the entire environment is blue is very annoying. So you have to be careful when laying out a page that if your character happens to have these colors which are found in the environment, you want to at least place them in a spot where there's something blocking them in the environment, like a middle area there.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I like that. Yeah. So I'm gonna go back to the psychology here. This is sent to me on a text from my handsomer brother Stephen, the handsomer Wakefield child. He got the color psychology of Disney characters. It's interesting. Strength, energy, and determination. You have Jafar, Gaston in red. And the purple is nobility and luxury. Maleficent. Let's see. I don't know who. Oh, Governor Ratcliffe from Pocahontas in the purples. In the blue, trust, loyalty, confidence, stability. Cinderella, Elsa. Greens are safety and endurance. You got Peter Pan, Mulan. In the yellows, joy, happiness, intellect. Woody, Wally. I would put joy in there too, right? Why haven't we talked about what's the name of that movie?
Inside Out.
Inside Out. Thank you. Yes, the Pixar. What if emotions had emotions? This must be before. I'm not seeing any Inside Out characters. But the gray and the black, elegance, formality, depth, evil. You've got a hunchback, Claude Frollo. Frollo, is that the?
Notre Dame.
Yeah, Captain Gontu from Lilo and Stitch, Ursula. So it's all very interesting. Of course, it's Disney, and they put zillions of dollars into thought of how to portray their characters. So I don't know where he found it, but you could find it's called The Color Psychology of Disney Characters. Very all right, folks. I don't want to wrap us up before we have anything else to say. I don't want to cut anybody off. Any closing thoughts before I talk about our Kickstarter campaign again, and then we can chat about ourselves to make shameless plugs for ourselves. Any closing thoughts?
No, I don't think so.
You guys have done a great job. Once again, we've determined that comic books are the greatest art form. The most thought goes into it, the psychology, the smartest and most creative and skilled people going to put their efforts into creating comic books. It is not, as we learned tonight, like coloring a coloring book. There is so much more that goes into it, into the psychology, into the levels of color grading and the skill level that goes into making an amazing comic book about rounding out the visual art that is a comic book. So before I wrap up, do not forget to go check out our Kickstarter campaign right now. We have 9 days left. We still have some amazing rewards if you want to show your support for independent comic books. Silverline is as independent as we get. We've got great stories by amazing people, amazing writers, and pencilers and inkers and colorists who are creating amazing things that you will not find anywhere else. If you want to get that little special item that you won't find from the big guys, go back our Kickstarter campaign. Right now we've got Bloodline and Friar Rush, two supernatural stories full of action and intrigue. Kickstarter right now. So let's wrap up. We can say goodnight, and we will go through who has been on our show this evening. First of all, thank you all to our experts for keeping the show going. As I said at the beginning, I am ignorant of this part of the process, and you have learned me good. So I'll go first, so I'm the first that you forget. My name's Scott Wakefield. I've been your host. I am creating and co-creating with my buddy Rory. Rory, if you're still out there, I love you. Hugs and kisses. We're creating Steam Patriots. It is at Steam Patriots on Facebook and Instagram. I am also Scott Wakefield, Scott M. Wakefield, I believe, on LinkedIn if you want to connect with me there. And check out my projects that should be coming from Silverline in the near future. So let's go. I'll go reverso. Mr. C. Michael Lanning down there at the end of my list. Tell us who you are and where they can find you and how they can support you.
C. Michael Lanning. I'm currently working on a project called Rejects with our editor, Roland Mann. The best place to find me is on Facebook at the artist C. Michael Lanning.
Thank you, sir. Alex?
My name is Alex Gallimore. You can pretty much find me on all different social medias by just typing my name in, Alex Gallimore. Most likely the only artist with that name. I'm currently working on Cat and Mouse issue 3, about to finish it up, and then be working on issue 4, and then another project down the line with Silverline.
All right, thank you, Alex. Elena?
Hi, I'm Elena. I'm on Instagram at, I should say what book I'm working on. I'm the colorist for White Devill, which is a book coming out soon by Silverline. You can find me on Instagram at EH Morton. You can find me on Twitter at Agent Morton. And you can find me on LinkedIn at Elena Morton. And I think that's all the social media I have. Oh, Facebook, but don't find me there. A lot of high school photos from me. Yeah.
Thank you, Elena. Tim TK.
I am Tim TK, the associate editor here. I do internet stuff, and we lost video real quick. Let me shut. I do all of our internet stuff. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Liker at TimTKWriter, where I will probably be live tweeting San Diego Comic-Con at home this year. I am on TikTok at Tim Doesn't TikTok, where I post bad TikToks. And I'm on Twitter. What?
Is there a good TikTok out there?
There's some quality ones, not mine though. And I'm on Twitch here at AgroBacon, where I'll be live later tonight playing Destiny 2.
Mr. Dan Hosick.
Dan Hosek. Working with Scott on Steam Patriots for Silverline, coloring and lettering. I guess it's on me now to make sure I get it done on the back, so I'll try to crank it on that. I worked on a comic called File 13. I think you can find that on Facebook at What Is File 13. The website isn't up right now, so I'm just working to get that back up, and hopefully I can get back on track with that too. I'd like to revisit that world.
All right, and Jeremy, go ahead.
Hey, I am Jeremy Kahn. I provided the colors for the Bloodline comic currently on Kickstarter, and I'm now working on Cray coming out some point in the future. You can find me on Twitter at Jeremy M. Kahn, and also I have a YouTube channel called AP Joy Paint, and there I upload a bunch of videos of myself coloring pages and illustrations. Today I actually just uploaded me coloring page 7 of issue 4 of Cray, actually.
Excellent. And that is perfectly relevant to our conversation tonight. Jeremy, that's awesome. All of you, I really, really, really appreciate your input on this topic. It is very cool, very important, integral to the creation of comic books. It's been fantastic learning from you. All of you who are watching, don't forget, go check out Kickstarter for Friar Rush and Bloodline. Support the independent comic books out there. Support the artists that you love. And everyone, remember, make mine Silverline. And good night to everybody. Have a great night.
Night.